Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin dominance as it has finally achieved the 60% milestone. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We did just relaunch the sale, so if you have been waiting to sign up for ITC Premium, now would be a great time to do so, and you can lock in the lower rate. Let's go ahead and jump in. As you can see, Bitcoin dominance is finally at 60%. It has taken a very long time to get there, and I feel like I can let out a huge sigh of relief to know that I saw it through to completion, right? At times it felt like it was never going to make it there, but here we are, October of 2024, October 29th of 2024, and the 60% milestone has finally been achieved. So for me now, I take a step back on the Bitcoin dominance view. The meat of the move is over, right? The meat of the move by Bitcoin dominance is behind us. A lot of people keep asking me, will it go higher from here? Right? Will it go higher? Because really, what it boils down to, people want to know when alt season is going to start. Okay, assuming we get one, right? Bitcoin dominance for at 60% is good enough for me. Is good enough for me, right? I don't feel the need to claim that it's going to go a lot higher from here. I don't think that it actually has to. There are chances, there's a risk that it could, right? There's a risk that it could. But you know something really interesting is in 2019, right? If you look at the 2019 cycle, the drawdown by Bitcoin dominance, right? If you look at the fib retracement, it topped at the 0.618 fib extension about 5 weeks after the first rate cut. This cycle, the first rate cut was about 5 weeks ago, and Bitcoin dominance rallied on up to the 0.618 fib extension. Isn't it amazing how it's almost a carbon copy, right? Rate cut, 5 weeks later, Bitcoin dominance hits the 0.618 fib extension. So the 60% target has been achieved. The 0.618 fib extension has been achieved, more or less. I don't know exactly to the decimal place, right? But it's more or less been achieved. Okay. So with that in mind, I do not feel the need to remain, as some of my followers might call it, toxically bullish on Bitcoin dominance any longer. There are risks that it could go higher, but there's also counterpoints to suggest that those risks might not be as high as we might think. The most obvious risk would be going back to the video that I did a few days ago, where I said, the video was about, talking about the elephant in the room, and that was that Bitcoin dominance was at 59%, but all Bitcoin pairs were still about 30% off their range lows. So for me, it makes sense to assume that the collective altcoin market is an oscillator at best, and therefore it could still go back down to the range lows. If the altcoin market does continue to bleed back to Bitcoin, there is still a chance that that dominance does go higher from here. Definitely a chance. And if you look at Bitcoin dominance in in the halving year of 2020, you will notice that it really started to move up in October, and then it got a pullback in November, and then had one final move in December. And here it started to move in October as well. So maybe it does the same thing where it goes up in October. October's almost over, right? And then maybe it gets a pullback sometime in November, and then maybe goes up one more time and then tops. Is that a possibility? Absolutely, right? So yes, Bitcoin dominance could go higher, but it doesn't make that much sense to me to put a lot of, merit to the idea that it's going to go a lot higher. Because again, it's hit the 618 about the same amount of time after the first rate cut as last cycle, and that ended up being the top for Bitcoin dominance. So then I go back to the thing I talked about in that video. Well, If alt Bitcoin pairs do break down, which they might not, right? There's a chance they might not. And with Bitcoin dominance at 60%, I don't feel as strongly about it anymore, if I'm being honest. Alt Bitcoin pairs did just put in a new low for the cycle within the last couple of days. So directionally, the view has been correct. But if they do break down, right? If they do break down here, is there a way that Bitcoin dominance doesn't just go up a ton? I would argue that there is. And one of the ways could be if ETH Bitcoin bounces, right? If you look at ETH Bitcoin, normally ETH Bitcoin would bottom within 2 to 3 months of breaking down from the support levels, right? This is when it would bottom. And it's got to be getting close, right? I think it's got to be getting close. I don't know exactly when it's going to occur, but I think it's going to happen relatively soon. And what could happen is if ETH Bitcoin bounces and alt Bitcoin pairs continue to go down, that could keep dominance at around 60%. The one thing I would say with regards to ETH Bitcoin in sort of trying to help identify when the bottom is actually in is the last two cycles, the bottom was in after ETH Bitcoin broke out, after it broke down below support. The bottom occurred after ETH Bitcoin crossed the 50-day SMA, the bottom was in, right? So in 2016, when it crossed the 50-day SMA, or in early 2017, the bottom had already been in. In 2019, once ETH Bitcoin crossed the 50-day SMA, the bottom was in, right? So I keep looking at that. Whenever ETH Bitcoin crosses that 50-day moving average, I would say the bottom's probably in for ETH Bitcoin. And it doesn't make sense to just remain bearish on ETH Bitcoin forever. I know there's a lot of people out there that are dunking on Ethereum. And you can't necessarily blame them when you look at the ETH Bitcoin valuation, but you also have to remember that a lot of people were bullish on ETH Bitcoin at 0.08, and now they're bearish on it at 0.036. My guess is in a year, ETH Bitcoin is going to be a lot higher than 0.036. That's my guess. In the short term, maybe it goes down a little bit more, but I do think in a year it's going to be much higher. And the reason why, I mean, a lot of people just think ETH is done for, but the reason why I don't think it is because this pattern is all too familiar. It felt like ETH was dying against Bitcoin over here. It felt like it was dying against Bitcoin right there. And I just feel like people are thinking the same thing again when it's just the same thing once again, right? It's just the same thing over and over and over again. And it was advertised a mile away. And now that we're here, I think a lot of people have just given up on ETH against Bitcoin when this is a perfectly normal pattern that it has completed 2 times before, and this will likely be the 3rd time it goes through this pattern. So because I think ETH Bitcoin is in the final innings of its downtrend, I think Bitcoin dominance is in the final innings of its uptrend. It's possible that if it does follow the cyclical view of Bitcoin, which it very well could, if you were to look at the ROI of Bitcoin from the bottom, this is normally when Bitcoin starts to move up. So the cyclical view does have merit, right? If Bitcoin continues to go up, it's likely that altcoins would take a back seat and Bitcoin dominance could continue to go higher. If you look at the year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin in 2024 and 2020 and 2016 and 2012, right? In Q4 is when it normally starts to go up. So the cyclical view does have merit to it. So the question is when alt season, right? Well, if you look at what happened in Q4 of 2020, Bitcoin dominance again went up in October, down in November, and then up in December. But if you looked at what happened here 2 months after, a month or two after the first rate cut, it just topped out before December, right? It topped out actually in September instead. And then it faded into the end of the year, right? It faded a lot into the end of the year. So the alt season question that a lot of people keep asking depends on whether we are there in the cycle or if we are here. The cyclical view of Bitcoin dominance would say that we are here because it's Q4 of the halving year. The monetary policy view would suggest we are here because this, we are basically approaching the time when Bitcoin dominance topped after rate cuts began, right? Rate cuts were here, Bitcoin dominance topped, rate cuts have started, Bitcoin dominance likely tops relatively soon. Both have validity, right? The answer is it's going to be something different more than likely, right? It's not going to be this. It's probably not going to be this. It's probably going to be something different. Maybe it's a mix of both of them, right? Because this view has merit because of monetary policy, but this view has merit because of the cyclical nature of Bitcoin. This is why identifying the Bitcoin dominance uptrend 3 years ago is so important. If you identified it 3 years ago, you stuck with Bitcoin, you preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio, you're in a position of strength, right? You can come into the market knowing that a lot of the altcoins you parted with 3 years ago are they're basically a shell of their former selves at this point, right? And you know that you could probably get 5x, 10x that altcoin for the same Bitcoin if you choose to convert, right? If you choose to convert. If you faded the Bitcoin dominance rally, then you're just really hoping that dominance tops extremely soon, right? Because it's getting really difficult probably for some of those altcoins, and they haven't really seen any major moves up against Bitcoin in a long time, right? So this is why it's important to not fade Bitcoin dominance for those 3 years. If you don't fade it and you just stick with the king, now that dominance is at 60%, you could start to hedge, right? And say, well, look, dominance is at 60. Maybe this is the top. And if it is, you can start hedging. If it's not, so what, right? I mean, you've still done so much better than most of the people that just stuck with altcoins. Now, there's some people that stuck with altcoins, and if they got the right ones, they've outperformed Bitcoin many times over. And I tip my hat to those people. I used to be that person in prior cycles. I chased those altcoins. This cycle, I said, you know what? I'm going to do the easy strategy and just stick with Bitcoin until dominance hits 60%. Now, dominance has hit 60%. So it's time to start thinking about the future. In 2025, I do think Bitcoin dominance will go down. Okay, I do. I think in 2025, dominance will go down. I think dominance is going to top between now and the end of the year, the second week of January at the latest. And it's possible the top's already in, right? I mean, I don't know. 60%, as I said, good enough for me, right? I don't feel the need to sit here and change the target now that we're here. The target's been achieved for me. I will admit and acknowledge that it could go higher if altcoins go to the range lows. But there are ways that that could happen, and Bitcoin dominance still stays around 60% if ETH Bitcoin can bounce. If in 2 months Bitcoin dominance is a lot higher than it is today, like let's say it's, higher in the 60s, then it's probably because ETH Bitcoin didn't bounce, and it just kept taking the altcoin market down with it. But I don't know what the market needs for dominance to turn around, but personally, like for me, 60% is sufficient. I can sleep happy at night knowing that I saw the dominance rally through to 60%. Anything beyond 60, I think is just gravy on top. I do appreciate you guys tuning in to all those Bitcoin dominance videos. I know there's been a lot of 1 to 2 hour videos over the last few years that some of you guys have sat through. And I just hope that it was worth it. I really do. I hope that you were able to stay Bitcoin heavy, preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio, and not make the same mistakes I made in prior cycles where I just chased all these random altcoins and then looked back after 3 years recognizing I would have just been better off with Bitcoin. I hope I saved some of you guys from that misery because I've experienced that misery and it's no fun. And if you faded Bitcoin dominance, it might be pretty hard right now, especially if you were in some of the alts that didn't do well. If you were in some of the alts that did do well, you're feeling pretty good, right? Because you took on the risk and it paid off. If you were mostly in alts that just bled back to Bitcoin, you probably don't really feel that great. But listen, it's the tuition you pay to learn the ways of the Cryptoverse. You're not going to get anywhere feeling bad about it at this point. I've been there. I've done that. You'll recover, right? You'll recover from that. And in the future, you'll know, right? You'll know that Bitcoin dominance goes up 3 years of the market cycle. and there's only 1 year where it really goes down. And this time has been no different, right? It went up in 2018, 2019, 2020. So only down in the post-halving year. 2017, dominance went down. 2021, dominance went down. My guess is that we don't need to overcomplicate it. And then in 2025, Bitcoin dominance probably going to go down. Who knows what's left of this yearly candle? My guess is not much more, but I'm not going to say that it can't go higher. I don't think it's going to go much higher from here. So those are my views on Bitcoin dominance. 60% milestone has been achieved. I feel like I saw the narrative through to the end. I did not, fold, even though it did seem like at times that it might not make it there. But it made it there, right? 60% has been achieved. Let's start, I'm going to start watching ETH Bitcoin like a hawk to see when it actually bottoms and when we can finally turn all this stuff around. I do appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you guys for being part of the dominance journey to 60%. We'll dissect this a little bit more as we get closer, as we go through the week. A lot could still happen this week is the reality, right? And I said, I put out a video, earlier this week saying it's decision time for the market, right? Bitcoin needs to make a decision, and it's been a pretty nice move up so far. Let's see if that can continue. And by the end of the week, I think it should be a lot clearer as to what the rest of the quarter holds and how that would affect altcoins going into 2025, because that's the answer everyone wants. Like, win alt season, and obviously with dominance hitting 60%, I think it at least becomes a discussion. And that's the thing, right? If you look at dominance, when is alt season, right? When is it? It's when Bitcoin dominance falls off a cliff, right? That is alt season. That is alt season. These moves in here are Bitcoin season, right? This is Bitcoin season, not alt season. The alt season that you're looking for is when Bitcoin dominance craters, and every time it's cratered has been in post-halving years, which is next year. So I think it makes sense to mentally prepare for dominance to go down in 2025. Be open-minded. Possible it could stick around at 60 for a while and maybe even go a little bit higher, but I wouldn't put a lot of I wouldn't think too critically or too hard about how high it's going to go. I think it'll go 60% is the target I gave. I'm happy with where it is. If it went down from here, I don't got a problem with it. That'd actually be perfect for me if it just went down from here. But if it does go up a little bit more, just know that it still is within the realm of the general market cycle theory. And I still think it will set up dominance to go down in 2025, regardless of what happens between now and the end of the year. So to summarize, 60% is finally here, and we'll see what happens in the coming weeks with dominance. I think it makes sense to start planning for it to go back the other way in 2025. The only thing to keep in mind is that alt Bitcoin pairs still are off their lows by a decent amount. And so that's why I don't, if you're going to hedge, it makes sense to slowly hedge and not necessarily bet the family farm and then watch alt Bitcoin pairs crash. But with Bitcoin dominance at 60, I do think, I will start to let my guard down as far as my Bitcoin dominance views. So Bitcoin dominance likely going down in 2025. We'll see what happens between now and then. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. See you guys next time. Bye.